It's wonderful. They're not going to believe this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another phenomenal, I'm going to say a little out there episode of Business Leadership Experts. I'm joined by Mrs. Nicole Gupta. And Nicole, the reason she's a little off center is that she's a proud graduate at the University of Florida. She's a Gator. And that I only said that for gain some points with you, with you Seminoles out there. But I want you to focus. We talk about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and the mental path that you have to take to get there. Now, occasionally there's going to be a physical path. Well, Nicole had both of them. She had both a physical, a crazy, insane physical path that she went down, and a mental path that she went down to why she is now the CEO of Etha. But Nicole, educate me a little bit. What does Etha even do?
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Mike. I'd say the simplest way to say what we do is that we're Democracy 2.0.
Okay. And I didn't know we were on version 2.0. I thought we were way past that. But what is Democracy 2.0?
Yeah, so basically what ETHA does is that we'll have a new way to solve all of our issues in communities that will aid in policy and lawmaking in our future. But our current app, we're still early stage though, but our current app actually allows us to kind of hold politicians accountable for their actions and statements, but also to rate them on a leaderboard. So, putting a little bit of pressure on some of our politicians for their words and statements directly from the source.
Okay. All right. So if I remember when we're talking off camera here, Nicole, that this really kind of all started long before your physical trip. You were working at Warner Brothers, so you've got some inside knowledge as to what happens behind media. Can you give us a little bit of background? What were you doing at Warner Brothers?
Yeah, so at Warner Bros, I was brought in specifically for a particular project. I was a software architect in a way, you could say that, or an analyst of that nature. Basically, I helped consolidate systems within the whole AT&T and Warner landscape. And I basically helped consolidate all of the systems, right? So AT&T has about 100, almost nearly 200 companies underneath it. And they have a lot of these old and archaic systems across the company. What I was really in charge of is putting them all kind of together and consolidating onto two systems. So thousands of systems kind of combined into two.
Thousands choked into two.
Yep.
Okay. And I want to dive here into Etha. I want to unearth a little bit more when you talk about Democracy 2.0. But Nicole, folks, this is odd. Etha was birthed after Nicole was lost and stranded in the desert in Nevada. Nicole, what the hell happened?
Yeah, no problem. So, it all kind of started at Warner, as you said. It was COVID, so of course I lost my job, and it was one of my dream jobs, and I always really wanted to be there. I also had a startup at the same time, and I lost that because of the industry that we were in. But other than that, like, of course, like any normal person, after losing a job and a startup, they'd have a mental breakdown, right? As I did. So, of course, naturally, I just had no idea what to do now. I was actually sleeping out of my car at the time I was working at Warner Bros. And the rent was like really high, and I just started the job. So, it was just like one of those things. I was trying to get my act together. But after all of that happened, I threw my phone out the window of my car as I was trekking back from California all the way back to Florida where I lived. Not the wisest idea, but that's what happened. I ended up driving up to San Francisco to get the rest of my stuff out of storage. All of that was actually closed because all of California was completely shut down, unlike the rest of the US. People in the West were shutting down way faster than the East Coast. So it was almost like a race of a time to get back home. And then things kind of turned for the worst, right? I ended up going.
It got worse?
Yes, it did. This is the part of the story where it gets really crazy. I ended up going from California into Nevada. When I was in Nevada, I went to go to a desert somewhere in Lovelock, Nevada. Lovelock, Nevada is basically the smallest town I've ever seen in my entire life, in the middle of the desert. So naturally, I just wanted to go blow off some steam in the desert and go drive around a little bit. Nothing harmless. But then it got really crazy. It started to rain, and then that rain started turning to snow in the desert. For anyone that wants to challenge me on this, everyone does have a weather report, so you could easily go to that day of, or those weeks that I was there. It was March 16th through the 20th, or the 25th, when I was in around that spot, where you could actually see that there was, snow in the desert that day. And my car got stuck on a rock. I couldn't get my car unstuck from this rock. I was throwing my clothes in the mud. I was slipping and sliding all over it. Still didn't work, to no avail. And prior to all of that happening, I got some fireworks because, with the place that I was at, it was in Pyramid Lake, somewhere around there. I got fireworks because it would have been nice to just, use them and see some stuff while I didn't have a phone and I was in this desert to go shoot them off. So I ended up giving up, and getting stranded in the desert. My car was completely totaled. And I was driving a Challenger back then, and it was a manual. So, all of these like things happen all at once. And I ended up shooting off a couple of fireworks in the desert to kind of just throw up some SOS signals. But I also had a 911 OnStar tracker in my car. I tried calling it so many times, but the service was so bad that, I had to attempt so many times to just get on the phone with somebody before the call got dropped. I waited about 10 hours or so in this desert. And the lady that was speaking to me over the phone, she was basically like, well, do you have food and water? I was like, yes, I do. And then 10 hours later, the cops came by and found me. And they were like, usually when we pick up somebody over here, they're usually dead. And I was like, okay, well, that's pretty intense. So my car was totaled. I had nothing but a backpack and a gallon of water with me left. They drove me back into at least the small part of Lovelock, Nevada, where people existed. Scrambling against time here. Lovelock was in the middle of nowhere, so there's no airports, planes, trains, cars. They were all shut down from COVID in those 2 days that I was there. And I got to Lovelock and I did the unthinkable. I ended up hitchhiking and getting to a smaller gas station in Lovelock, where these two truckers ended up finding me, and they wanted to help me out. I think their name was Quan or Laquan Warner, and they actually helped drive me east. That's all my goal was. It's just to go east, east, east. So they took me from Lovelock, Nevada.
Okay.
And I ended up at Wendover, Nevada. Wendover, Nevada, I recognize that they were commercial truck drivers, so it's probably not the best thing. But and so I got out of the car and I saw train tracks. So I was like, naturally, like we see train tracks, maybe I could find some luck finding a train station. So I veered off from the gas station and walked on the train tracks. And
Okay.
little more than I ended up walking to these train tracks, and I ended up walking 15 or 18 miles or so, and I ended up at this mine quarry in the middle of the night.
All right.
So
Nicole,
if you could,
I've got the map here. All right.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly,
Mm-hmm.
here's West Wendover, right down here at the bottom of the right-hand corner. All right.
Yeah.
The red line is what?
That red line is my journey on those train tracks. I heard the trains, I saw them coming every 4 hours. So I was like, there has to be some kind of railroad or some kind of a train station, since they're all coming from this direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I'll walk on the train tracks because I do see a building that looks like a train station. And,
Okay.
there's like horns blowing off over there. So I was like, yeah, this is definitely a train station. So I'm going to be able to, hitchhike off of this train. And little did I know that I ended up in a mine quarry at like 2 or 3 in the morning.
And that's right up in here. Is that right?
Yes, it's
Top left-hand
Greymont.
corner here. What would you
Mhm.
estimate? How long would you estimate, Nicole, that this walk took you from West Wendover, following the red line, which are the train tracks.
Mhm.
How long was that walk? 20
I
minutes, 30
start
minutes? What would you guess?
I would say I started at like 9 a.m. as soon as the truckers left the gas station,
Okay.
and I got there around like 1 or 2 a.m.
In the morning.
in the night. Yeah, in the night. Yeah. And when if you ever get to see a picture of what this like Greymont Peak uh, plant looks like, it looks like you're literally on Mars or something like that. It has all these like turbines and these crazy lights and things like that. So I ended up, no one was there obviously at 2 in the morning. So I ended up going and finding a little office space in that plant, in that mine quarry.
Okay.
And I ended up putting together, a couple of chairs so I could make a bed, and I put a fire blanket over myself because it was the desert, so it does get really cold at night. And I woke up the next morning to alarms and people spraying Lysol in my face because again, it was like COVID time. So they ended up quarantining me for a couple of hours. They didn't know what to do with me. They were like, "This is the craziest thing that I've ever seen. Like, where did you even come from?" I was obviously delusional. They had an ambulance come check me out, and they were like, "You're fine." I'm like, "I'm not fine," like and all these other crazy things. And like they just kept questioning me, and I was just like, okay. But then that morning when they did find me, I ended up having to be driven from all of those workers at that mine quarry
Mhm.
all the way back to the same gas station I started at in West Wendover.
So their best plan was to take you back where you started from.
Yes.
That's
Talk
the
about
plan. That was
ground
plan
zero.
A,
Yeah,
the one and only plan. All right. First, they
yeah,
wake you up by spraying you with Lysol, probably poking you with a bunch of sticks to see if you're alive or not. and then,
basically.
and then the best plan is, well, let's send her back from where she started from.
Yeah,
So now you're
yeah.
right back from where you started from at that same gas station.
Yep. And cops were trying to settle me down, and then I really lost it because I was like, well, now what? I'm literally stranded. There's nothing here except a bunch of payphones. And I started to like panic a little bit. The cop wasn't obviously helping me at all. And then just ultimately, like, what was really scary at the time too is like at the mine quarry, they were like, you're at a mine quarry where any step that you take could be like a fall to your death. It's about 150 feet down into these mine quarries. But given that fact, when I was back at West Wendover at that gas station, it was more so like, how do I get home?
Mhm.
Enterprise cars were shut down. There was no airports that were working in that area because of COVID. No people with cars would take a crazy person like this off the street. So, when I was in the middle of this breakdown at that gas station back at Wendover, this guy comes up to me. His name is Cameron Saltus. He's also another truck driver.
Okay.
He was a Tesla Model X truck driver that was going on the way to Denver. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be alive, but he ended up taking care of me and driving me all the way to Denver. So
Okay.
Denver, I stayed over 5 days. I saw my childhood friend there, so that was my main goal. Now I'm at least in Denver, a little bit more east.
Okay.
Um, and then from Denver, I stayed there for a couple of days to just relax a little bit and obviously settle down from what I just went through. And then
All
my
right.
friend knew a train conductor, an Amtrak train conductor, so she ended up getting me off on a ticket from Denver. Went up to Chicago. From Chicago, went to DC, and then from DC all the way back down to Florida. I think we actually have a picture of
Yeah.
this, of the whole trip.
Here we are.
Yes, that's the
All right.
whole thing.
Now, this is the whole thing in its entirety, even when you were at Warner Brothers, correct?
Yes, so Warner
Okay.
Bros is down in LA. Yep.
All right. So we're starting at LA. This is just your drive, and right here is where things go nuts. Is that right, Nicole? Right here on the border of
Yes.
Nevada, or
Yes.
okay. And
Yeah.
even within here, Nicole, you're being driven back and forth a couple of times,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then Cameron, is it Cameron Sawtooth who was driving the Tesla truck?
Yes.
Okay, what was he
Yes.
hauling? I got to know. What was he hauling?
They were all a bunch of Model X's,
Okay.
Teslas.
All right. I think you did mention that. So Cameron takes you from the border of Nevada all the way over here to Denver, correct?
Hmm.
Okay. Your childhood friend has a friend who's an Amtrak conductor, and then you take a train all the way up here to Chicago.
Yep.
And all right. Now we're in Chicago. What's the next leg of your trip here?
So, I obviously was out of money because I didn't have my phone to get my next paycheck from Warner after, the job thing. So I was just like, the Amtrak stopped there for like a day, day and a half. So people were just, kind of talking to me, and, it was just, it was nothing happened in Chicago. So I just waited a couple of days. I took some books from some places, just to keep myself entertained. Because again, I only had a backpack and some water and a couple of snacks, and that's about it. So from Chicago, I took the Amtrak to DC.
Okay.
DC, same thing happened. It was just a couple of layovers, a couple of days. And then from DC, I ended up in Atlanta. In Atlanta, a friend picked me up. Obviously her dad's a doctor, so she couldn't have me over, but
Right.
she helped me get a what's really funny, her name is Tiffany. So it's like it was breakfast at Tiffany's almost in Atlanta.
Okay.
And it was just like I was in Atlanta. So I ended up taking a Greyhound bus all the way from Atlanta down to Tampa, Florida. So this is the whole trip, and it was all 4 weeks off the grid. No phone, no weapon, nothing but me kind of trusting everyone to get me back home safely.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
I don't, you can't make this stuff up, folks.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of symbolism in here,
Yeah.
right? As to just life in itself. Now, Nicole, I'm a practicing Christian, all right? And I'm not saying anybody else has to, but I'm curious about throughout this entire time, did you experience any change to you on what you might consider a spiritual basis?
Yeah, I'd say my whole perception and everything flipped during this time. It's like, if I can survive this thing, I could really probably handle just about anything. Because at any point of that trip, I could have been killed. I could have been, whatever else that anyone can think of that could have gone wrong, it didn't.
Mhm.
And I'm like, why? Like, I was waiting for things to happen that were this bad. Like being able to talk through all of these truckers and all of their perceptions, and even learning about their fears. The two gentlemen that did take me the first trip at Lovelock to Wendover,
Mhm.
they were two Black gentlemen, right? And they were basically saying like, aren't you afraid of us? And I'm like, no. Like, and they were like, well, you're white and we're Black. It's like, we're scared of you sometimes. It's just like, we don't know you. This is like the story of like a really crazy thing that can happen. And I was like, no, like it's totally fine. And I think that there's just like a lot of fear in terms of exposure and perception that I did come across during this time frame. And also, this is COVID, right? Everyone was freaking out. No one
Mhm.
had the same thing to say, and I went across the whole country. Not one person had the same thing to say about COVID. Big
Hmm.
problems, right? But
Right.
in terms of that, it's like when I was out there in the middle of the desert in the blizzard, I never felt more alive than in that moment. I
Wow.
actually was happy. I was screaming out there because no one could hear me in a good way. I was just like jumping up and down in the snow. It's like, I really like what happened is like when you're at your lowest sometimes,
Uh-huh.
that's really where you find yourself and where you find your purpose.
Hmm.
You never become more alive, and you become absolutely fearless in pursuit of whatever you want. And that's the biggest thing that I kind of took away from that is like, well, nothing can stop me now, spiritually, mentally, physically, nothing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So to unpack a couple of things there, what's probably maybe the biggest lesson that you took away from just that trip on itself?
Yeah, I'd say grit, if you
The
have
book.
absolute, yeah, the book with Angela Duckworth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So she like I read her book actually a couple years ago before this like thing happened, but you know, you absolutely like when you have nothing left, you have no resources.
Hmm.
You really have to start doing things crazy enough to get yourself to the next place little by little. It's very iterative. You're stuck in a desert. How do you dig yourself out? It's all
Hmm.
about how much you can persevere. I think there's this quote out there saying that a stream will, smoothen the stone much faster than, you just like hitting it, right? So it's
Right.
like perseverance over time. And you have to value yourself enough to persevere through a lot of these obstacles. And that really does come down to grit. How can you get yourself out? You know?
Hmm. But you had a defined goal of what you
Hmm.
wanted.
Hmm.
Fair to say? Now, so you're driving across America. You're meeting different people, different backgrounds, different races, different religions. What did you learn in those particular 4 weeks that you were off the grid? Now, remind everyone, we're looking at just the walk that she took and the travel back. How many of us could survive? She didn't have her cell phone. How many of us could have made it 24 hours, 48 hours without your cell phone before we mentally lose it, right? So you survived off the grid. Is it safe to say that you kind of survived off of trust, kindness, and a bunch of gas station pay phones at a bunch of gas stations?
Yes, yes, and it's like throughout this time, when back in like let's say a couple years ago, everyone's like stranger danger, right? And like
Right.
everyone like anyone that you meet is a danger potentially to you. You don't know them. They can be capable of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I that had to be all thrown out the window because I was in survival mode, right?
Okay.
And I realized that the world is not a bad place as much as we think it is, as much as we're told that it is. And I
Okay.
think at the end of all of this, what I've seen and the people that I've talked to, the people that have helped me really get back home, it's it truly all comes down to perception,
Okay.
exposure, and trust with one another, right? We
Right.
don't have these things and these titles anymore, at least from what I see in social and news media. But this is what it comes down to: is that the world really is a good place when people are struggling, and they'll really show themselves of how to get really back home, and all of this kind of stuff that comes along with it.
Well, as you're kind of experiencing so much in such a 4 week span of time, is there any unifying theory out there, Nicole, that could bind us that you experienced?
Yeah, yeah. So like kind of taking it back to my startups idea, but also this story.
Okay.
And it's really like it's despite how the media kind of portrays how far apart we are in political ideology or anything else,
Mm-hmm.
as people, we really feel divided. We've
Yeah.
we've really lost our trust in what the media tells us. Humans aren't dumb. Even the dumbest ones are starting to really realize like what the media really is. We've really like I've seen like just through social media and news media
Mm-hmm.
that we're starting to lose our abilities to talk to one another, especially constructively. We've really
Hmm.
lost sight of the bigger picture here. And I find that the lack of unity and confidence of trust is very un-American.
Hmm. All right. I want to come back here, Nicole. I want to come back to your earlier statement about what is democracy 2.0.
Mhm.
What issues are you going to be solving? And I'm imagining that this is kind of what led you to Etha, right?
Mhm.
How is Etha going to make a difference amongst all of this mess?
Yeah, yeah. So we are a very, very early stage startup. We've been in business for about a year and a half, but
Okay.
obviously really big things take a very long time to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's like there's a lot of, there's no way to currently hold politicians accountable or even rate actions and statements and legacy news media, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to anyone really listening or watching, again, I really want to hit hard that we are a very early startup, but
Okay.
and we do have a long way to go still in terms of development.
Okay.
But we currently hold politicians accountable by putting pressure on them from the public. If you really think about it,
Mhm.
If we have millions of people voting and commenting in real time, that
Right.
real scoreboard that we have on our app actually will reflect politicians' actions and statements, right?
Right.
So with that, the public will be allowed to actually put more pressure on them with a voice and voice their concerns on that leaderboard, which all of the politicians are found under. For
Okay.
example, Bill Clinton is actually the least liked politician on the platform. Poor guy can't ever catch a break, but it kind of shows like who's the most active, but also who's the most promising person, who's been able to deliver the most to us, who has lied the least, because people
Mhm.
are smart. They do track these individuals, these politicians over time, right? But there's
Right.
no concentrated way of doing this, right? So
Right.
over time, we'll be able to add a report card feature that goes next to all of these politicians and how they're doing in the eyes of the people in real time. The report card will kind of reflect everyone's opinions, concerns, and votes about those politicians, but also show the trends of these lawmakers.
Okay.
Like, I promised to build the wall and it never happened. And you over promise, under delivered, right?
Right.
This is what it will show, no matter what side you're on. That's not what I'm focusing on. I'm trying to put us all back together here, right? These trends will actually boost up or break down these politicians' score based on what everyone is saying about them and voting on them, but also how they have promised us and what they have
Mhm.
promised us.
Right.
So politicians would actually have to be careful in the future about what they say, because if a voter senses or sees that report card,
Right.
right, they have overpromised and underdelivered, it's not going to be an easy run or a next term for that politician to serve in that campaign, because that score will actually harm their perception of that politician or boost it, depending on how you see it, on who is doing well or not. But it will go much deeper than this, of course, over time. But this gives the public an actual chance of putting pressure on these guys, fishing out the bad ones, and putting the good guys into the light. So no pressure.
Now, I can see that on kind of a grand national basis, right?
Mhm.
Um, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, uh, you know, senators from different states. But really, what at times affects me the most are my local politicians. What about that group? Will that be included?
Yes, so we're actually starting with communities first, not the big cities, not the national stuff. We're starting with small communities.
Oh,
So
okay.
what the app will do in the future is that it'll actually get people in smaller communities of small towns of like anywhere from 3 to 10,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to collect everyone's issues and everything that they're sensing in that community of what needs to be solved first in terms of their priorities. Um, Based on this, people are either going to naturally be able to help one another kind of in a community type setting, or
Right.
you're going to get to see all the pooled issues. That way, like, let's say if we're somewhere in Kansas and there's a pothole that keeps ruining everyone's cars, and that's the only thing that's going on there, people will know to bring that to the attention very easily through a dashboard showing all of these issues in that community. And then they'll go straight to that politician. It will go straight to that. Ethan will actually be able to create a dashboard based on everyone's issues
Mm-hmm.
and show an escalation plan of what really needs to be solved first, right? If
Right.
people go back on the app and they see that the politician went against with 99% of that population and focus on something else, there's going to be some issues there. It's the whole point is transparency, extreme transparency and accountability, starting with community level politicians and then taking all that data to power better policy and lawmaking for the nation, for a state level, a regional level, and so on.
Oh, okay. So with and there's a lot of moving parts there, and we've talked off camera a bit here, and I can understand where Nicole is kind of going with this, but so as we're kind of putting all this stuff together, what's the future for Etha? What can we
Yeah,
expect?
yeah. So the future, funny thing. We may never know for sure, but our users and our citizens are going to be the ones to tell us the way. We are really just trying to put this together for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But what we envision that this platform will help communities form closer bonds with one another and actually give them actionable steps to solve diff- difficult problems within their communities, but also share conversations and issues to actually start solving things. social media doesn't solve things right now. We just argue to death, and that's the end of it.
Mm.
You know, this will actually be like, hey, we should start focusing on this and solve this so we don't actually get angry anymore. You know, that's what I'm trying to diffuse a little bit, is the anger and hostility in both
Mhm.
news and social media. But coming back to that, we really want smaller communities to be impacted first, because they're the ones at the very end of the day that will shape policy and lawmaking.
Okay.
And you know, based off the future of their constructive comments and also putting pressure on politicians to outperform their promises, you know, all we want to see here at ETHA is real change, and that really starts with the people of America,
Right.
nothing else. Media, government, politicians, they don't matter. It's really up to us to really start solving these small things and becoming big things in the nation, right?
Right.
One day we really hope to implement a lot of this on, you know, the blockchain, but until then, we really have like real-time voting for politicians
Hmm.
on this site.
Right.
And slowly over time, we'll be able to create a digital fortress.
That'll be cool. Now, I know right now, ETHA is you're focused on politicians,
Mhm.
but not long ago, and where you first grabbed my attention, a discussion we were having on LinkedIn, you made kind of a rather bold statement. You said that roughly 70% of political Twitter followers were fake. That's a bold statement. I mean, how did you come up with that percentage?
Yeah. So a lot of this had to do, I think that's how we met, Mike, is we were kind of talking a little bit about all of these issues with Elon and Twitter and all this kind of stuff. But we had to do our own research because we're trying to grow our own users, right? So
Right.
naturally we fell into this problem. I found this because off of our team's research, and how we did this is also what I want to explain for anyone else that wants to also see these numbers. It's real proof here.
Mhm.
You know, we took every follower under politicians' profiles and then
Okay.
we put them into an Excel sheet, right?
Right.
We used Python coding languages to automate this process for
Mhm.
all these politicians across Twitter. We determined they were fake or inactive using this other tool called a phantom buster. What
Okay.
phantom busters basically do is they show the level of activity on a person's profile. Most of the followers that we've seen under any one of these politicians, profiles were actually inactive since 2020, which means little to no activity on the site, meaning that they're most likely bots that have been spun up by maybe one or two powerful people that really know what they're doing. It's really easy to create bots and follow profiles. I could have a whole nother session and show everyone how to do that if they really want to, right? But
Right.
it's hard to keep up with though. You know, once you create these bots, you're going to have to continuously spin them up if you want them to look real or active. If we run analysis for all of Twitter, I don't think it's truly as high as 70% across the board.
Right.
But I do think that it is more than Elon's estimate of what he said, which was 15 to 20% in some articles. I
Mhm.
think it's more than 20% across all of Twitter. This is a massive problem. Since we're talking to both people, but also not real people,
Right.
and using these bots, they're super, super real when you talk to them, right?
Hmm. Right.
Um, it's just making us more upset and divided over time because we're just talking to a wall here, right? And
Mm.
most people don't know it because of how real these bots can respond to you.
Wow.
This actually skewed a lot of our perceptions and ran our united, like, is ruining our United States of America. ETHA has a way around these bots, right? But
Right.
for that's for another time, right?
Okay.
It's just it's pretty dangerous to, like, you know, go and uncover a lot of this stuff because social news media is super fake and there's really nothing to stop it right now except ETHA.
Okay. You kind of brought to light to me, really, um, who owns what
Mhm,
in the media. So
mhm,
from that, let me pull this up here real quick, Nicole.
mhm.
I don't think any of us know really how bad this is.
Yeah.
Um, can you explain, Nicole? Is it fair to say that this is fairly accurate as to who owns what media?
Yes, this is the left and the right side of the media. We have Fox and all of those other guys, and then we have CNN and all of those other guys.
Okay.
Typically, when you work for a media company, you have to pick a side, right?
Right.
So these are the two sides right now that you see. Rupert Murdoch, he owns a majority of like the whole Fox and TV industry on the right side.
Okay.
Mr. Jeff over here owns a majority of the liberal type medias. What's really
Okay.
crazy about the right side of this photo, if you're looking at it, all of these companies are also owned by a company that isn't mentioned in here, and that's AT&T.
So AT&T, you're saying the right side. I want to make sure that I'm on the same page as you are. AT&T is the ultimate owner of CNN, HBO,
Time Warner,
Time
Warner
Warner.
Bros, all of those. Yeah.
Okay. So it's AT&T that pulls the strings. It's safe to say, or I should say the owner of, and if you look on the right side, and I think that's under Jeff, yeah, pardon me, I don't want to hack up his name here.
Yeah.
But if I can't help but notice, if you look on the right side with the group that does stand with CNN and HBO, that there's and Warner Brothers, there's some similarities when it comes into political bias. I'll be a little bit bold. I don't think I am. All right. And on the left-hand side, under the Murdoch group, you've got Fox, BTN, Fox Crime, Nat Geo, and Walt Disney is also owned. Is that true?
Yep.
By Murdoch Group. ESPN is owned by the Murdoch Group, which owns Fox. And you can see what I think is kind of unusual. They own some right-leaning media outlets, but where ESPN is now becoming more and more known as left-leaning, I think that's odd that a right-leaning organization owns them, but allows them to take the direction that they want to go. That's in itself odd.
Yeah.
That is, and this, if I understand, Nicole, this is what's driving the divisiveness of our country.
Yep.
Two organizations.
Everything was made in a Hollywood basement.
Yeah. The whole thing was made in a Hollywood basement.
And I think I shared a map with you as well. You know, when I worked at Warner, you go down this one street, you know, you have the whole Warner little section over here. And then there's the whole Fox, CNN, or sorry, Fox and Disney whole section over here. It's just one little road that actually connects the two. That is where everything and all of the problems have been created in the US media, just from that one road outside of Burbank.
And I believe at the top right-hand side is where you see Walt Disney on the map. On the top right-hand side here is where Disney is. On the bottom left-hand side, and there's one road that just divides. Look, there's one freaking road right here that shows
and all of the division starts from there. If you really think about it, you slap an electoral college map over the US. This is not a conspiracy. This is, you could actually Google Maps this thing, you know, end to end. This is where everything is created. And then from there, we're all segmented into bits and pieces based on where we live, based on the demographics of that particular state, piece by piece, media by media house. And you have to just take back and look at that map of the Warner and like this, the right and the left side of those conglomerates, compare them to our electoral college map, and I think there's going to be a lot of light bulbs going off after we see these things.
This is insane. Up here is Disney.
Yep.
And is it safe to assume that Fox is also, I don't want to put you in a position you can't vouch for, Nicole, but is Fox located close to this area up here as well?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Fox is generally, its HQ is in New York City, but they do have a lot of offices very near and close to these two areas. Yeah.
Okay. And right down here on the left-hand side is Warner Brothers.
Yep. Yep.
And here's the street that divides these two from each other.
Yep.
I guess
Pick a
you could
side, any side.
pick a side. And that's where we've been forced to pick a side.
Yeah.
Pick the right, pick the left. But we're being driven up further and further apart. And if I remember what you were alluding to, Nicole, you said that Americans, from your experience in your travels, Americans feel we are divided, but what our genuine beliefs are is we're not really so divided. Is that safe to assume?
I'd say that. You know, it's just about being able to change the perceptions and show people like through examples like this that it's not us that are being divided, it's the media networks that are doing this. You know, this is a massive problem, and that's what ETHA is really trying to do, is break up all of these monopolies and really give it back to people, right? Like these, if you even, this is a very strong example, and it's actually kind of painful for me to even mention this, but it's even gotten to our children's cartoons. If you see and take those two maps, if you ever watch Rick and Morty or Family Guy, and if you really pay attention, it does have some conservative connotations to it. Similarly to any one of the CNN or the left side of those cartoons, it's got a more liberal connotation to it. I'm not on anyone's side, but I'm for everyone, if that makes any sense. Is that I really want to just show these parallels, because this is almost programming, right? This programming is just, this is what's driving the US further apart. I personally think that we should be becoming more closer together before something bad happens. Like, September 11th is coming up, and it's like, this is kind of the same pattern, same routine, that if we don't stop this in motion, things like this will be inevitable. History will repeat itself, right? What I'm trying to do is just really break this apart before it gets any worse. And, I really want to see people in the US become united again. I've talked to extremists on both sides. I've talked to the middle. I've talked to almost everybody in the world. I talk all day. And one thing that I've seen is that everyone says the same exact thing, that we aren't united as we used to be. And all I have to say is, like, you're right. And we have a lot larger enemies and a lot bigger things to worry about than tearing people apart in the US here.
Very true. It seems like majority of individuals, like they've always been, in the middle. There will always be extremes on both sides of an issue, but the majority of Americans have always been in the middle, exercising our freedom to sway which way we want to. But no one, it sounds like what you're telling me, Nicole, no one has tried ever as hard as in recent memory to divide us through the media. Now, with your experience working at Warner, or just in your observations, why are they doing it?
The only thing that I can think of as to why, this is just an assumption, this is not anything else,
Right.
is that if any other foreign country, like an enemy country, takes a look at the US and sees this chaos in the media, no one can even make sense of what's going on. Right? So I understand that there's certain information out there that should never be accessible to the public. An example of this would be nuclear codes. You don't want to just give that out to every single person.
Correct.
But when it comes to the media, I think that it is a protective layer from a very, very high assumption type level, is that maybe it's just confusing all of our enemies. But to me, that's the only thing that I could possibly think of as to why they're doing this. But the other one is obviously money. Everyone's financially, everyone in the US is money hungry. That's all they care about, is money, money, money. I don't care about the money. I've removed myself. I care about the power, and using that power to change things for the better for the American public.
By having real, authentic information.
Yep.
By real people. And tracking their genuine beliefs.
Yep.
Nicole, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on almost every social media profile. I currently have, my name is Nicole Ogloza. If you do see it in the Zoom, Ogloza. It's one of the very few rarest names, so you definitely are going to find me. But the other way is my email or my phone. So my phone is 724-6154. And then my email is Nicole, so Nicole at etha.one, etha.one. So again, that's Nicole at etha.one. It's not .com. I did .one because I want us all under one roof and together again.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Nicole, fascinating, exemplary story of what you went through to get where you're at today.
Mhm.
And you're the type of person we just can't help but wish for the absolute best as you go forward. Thank you so much for joining us. For you guys, thank you so much for joining us, watching us all the way through this particular episode. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.
See you later.
Well, thanks for watching that last segment. So how can Temple Executive Coaching help you? Well, there's basically 4 ways. 1, subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell so that you know when we put out a new video. Number 2, we help you to create an effective strategy to help answer the most important strategic questions to give your organization an edge over your competition in your market. Number 3, we help to develop your leadership pipeline's mental fitness and their self-awareness so that they can execute on their most important objectives. And last, we help to strengthen your cash flow management and your financial position. Now, to learn more, set up an appointment. Email us at info@templeexecutivecoaching.com.